You know, when we look back at major historical events, we usually just remember the headlines. But the hijacking of flight IC-814, well, that's a story that's not really about what happened. It's about the impossible decisions that were made behind closed doors under unimaginable pressure.
At the absolute heart of this crisis, which all started on Christmas Eve back in 1999, was this number, 176. That's 176 lives just hanging in the balance. And their fate, it all came down to a single critical decision. So I want you to put yourself in that room for a second. Imagine you're the one in charge. The phone rings, and it's the hijackers on the other end. What's your move? What do you do? Okay, so let's set the scene. It all started as just another flight. December 24th, 1999. Indian Airlines flight IC-814 takes off from Kathmandu, headed for Delhi. Totally routine. Passengers are getting comfortable, the crew's doing their thing. Everything was completely and utterly normal. But then, in just a matter of seconds, that normalcy was just shattered. As the plane flew into Indian airspace, hijackers, armed and ready, stormed the cockpit. The pilots had no choice. They were forced to change course. The new destination, demanded at gunpoint, was Lahore, Pakistan. And just like that, the crisis had begun. The first few hours of this thing were pure chaos. So after being hijacked over in India, the plane heads for Lahore. But get this, Pakistan at first said, no, you can't land here. They even turned off the runway lights. The plane was running on fumes, so they eventually allowed a quick refueling and then basically forced it to leave. And that's when it flew to Amritsar, landing back on Indian soil. And this right here, this is where our story takes a huge turn. The landing in Amritsar wasn't just a pit stop, it was a golden opportunity. It was India's one chance to take back control of the situation. So on the ground in Amritsar, Indian authorities had this stark choice in front of them. Option 1, send in the commandos. A decisive move for sure, but incredibly risky for the passengers. Option 2, delay. Try to negotiate. That buys you time, but it also lets the hijackers get more settled and aggressive. In all the confusion, they chose to delay. And this created a really dangerous paradox. The whole point of delaying was to reduce the risk, right? But that delay, it ended up becoming the biggest risk of all. While the authorities on the ground were hesitating, the hijackers got spooked, and they forced the plane to take off again. They left Indian soil, and with it, any real chance of a quick and clean resolution was gone. So the plane's new destination, it completely changed the game. It landed in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and the second those wheels touched down, India found itself cornered, and let's be honest, pretty much powerless. So what made Kandahar such a complete nightmare for the Indian negotiators? Well, for starters, it was controlled by the Taliban, a regime India didn't even recognize diplomatically. That meant any kind of military operation was a non-starter, and there were no official channels to work through. The hijackers, meanwhile, felt safe, they felt protected. For India, it was basically a strategic checkmate. So you see, this thing had spiraled way beyond just a hijacking. It had morphed into a full-blown international diplomatic nightmare. The Taliban were claiming to be these neutral mediators, but on the ground, they were really just giving the hijackers a safe place to operate, which made an already impossible situation even worse. With the situation totally deadlocked on the ground in Kandahar, the real focus now shifts. It moves back to those closed-door meetings happening in Delhi, where the true crushing weight of this crisis was really being felt. And that's when the hijackers finally put their ultimate demand on the table. They wanted the release of several dangerous terrorists from Indian prisons. This wasn't just a simple prisoner swap. No, this was a decision that had massive long-term consequences for India's national security. The days just kept dragging on. The negotiations were going nowhere. And inside that plane, you can only imagine. The conditions were getting worse and worse. Outside, the hijackers' tone was getting uglier, shifting from negotiation to outright violent threats. Their patience was clearly running out. And then, it happened. The moment everyone had been dreading. The hijackers brutally murdered one of the passengers, a man named Rupin Katyal. They released his body onto the tarmac. That single horrific act sent a shockwave across all of India. The pressure on the government to save the remaining hostages became absolutely unbearable. This murder just blew the lid off the debate inside the Indian government.
On one side, you had the hardliners. They were arguing, we cannot release these terrorists. It sets a terrible precedent. But on the other side, you had officials saying, we have to save these innocent lives. The passengers have to come first. It was this agonizing choice between a core principle and real human lives.
So, faced with this impossible choice and the constant, very real threat of more violence, a final decision was made behind closed doors. India was going to concede.
After eight long, agonizing days, the ordeal was finally over. The Indian government flew the terrorists they demanded to Kandahar, and in exchange, the 175 surviving passengers were at last allowed to walk free. So the passengers were safe, and that's, of course, what mattered most. But that decision, it came at a very steep cost. Every choice has a price, and many people still argue that the price of this one was India's future security. Releasing those terrorists kicked off a debate that, honestly, is still going on today. And that brings us right back to where we started. Given the incredible pressure, the ticking clock, and all those lives at stake, was giving in the right call? Or did it create a whole new risk, one whose consequences we might still be dealing with? It's a question with no easy answer, and it's a burden that history will continue to judge.